All right, this episode of Whitetail Cribs, we're headed to Iowa to visit with Bill Winke. Bill Winke started as an outdoor writer in the 90s, started Midwest Whitetail in 2007. And it's likely you've probably seen some of these hunts over the years on YouTube, but now you get to hear all the stories. Check out his brand new trophy room at his office. Hope you guys enjoy this. Let's get right into it. Here we go.
Welcome to my home. Well, it's not my home, it's my shop and my office. Come on in, let's look at some deer. Welcome to Midwest Whitetail. So this is the shop area, and I don't have a whole lot of projects going on out here, but I did overflow some of my deer and some of my other big game. But let's take a look at some of these real quick. You know, even these across here, you know, we've got a deer that I killed in Montana in velvet. That was a buck that was on one of the early Monster Bucks videos, Realtree Monster Bucks videos from the Milk River. And the one next to it was a buck that I killed down in Texas with a friend of mine that was, you know, it was a really cool hunt. I had a lot of fun there. And then next one is just a Southern Iowa buck. He was cool because if you look at him, you'll see like a real wicked tine coming off the base. And I could tell that deer was in that area or that something like that because all the trees were like ripped. You know, the rubs had this big gash, you know, right down the middle of them. And finally killing that buck, it was pretty cool to see, you know, what was making those gashes on those trees. You know, another one, the buck on the right there was I killed that deer on a morning in mid-November, early November. It was 80 some degrees. We had like an 80 plus degree temperature spell there where, you know, the hunting was super hard. You know, the afternoons, the deer didn't even get out of their beds until after dark. So I killed him on a morning hunt. You know, my greatest memory of that deer was just the fact that it was so hot. You know, it's not a good time to kill big whitetails when it's hot, but that guy was, you know, he was my one, let's say, you know, 80 plus degree day deer kill, but a number of, you know, nice bucks here. I just haven't got them up on the wall yet. Like I said, I've just moved in here a couple months ago. I need to find places for them, European mounts. All right, so this wall, this was a pretty cool buck that I killed him in 2002, and he was blind on his left side. And if you look at it close enough, you can see that the taxidermist did a nice job of putting like the milky eyeball in there to show that he was blind on that side. And his rack took on that, you know, contorted kind of shape because of that. But he came past me on the right side of the tree, or, you know, whatever side it was that his left eye, the blind eye, couldn't see me. So I was thinking, and I saw him coming, and I saw that he had that milky eye, and I thought, this is finally what I've been looking for my whole life is a deer that can't see me. So it was, I don't want to say I took advantage of him because you never take advantage of these guys, but that was kind of funny that he came past me on the side where he could not see out of the eye that would have been in my direction. So I could have been up there waving my arms and still would have got him. Now I need the ones that are both blind and can't smell, and I'll really be in the game. Big mule deer, shot a lot of mule deer out in eastern Colorado back in the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. And that was one of my favorite hunts. Other than whitetail, I loved hunting big mule deer. There's a few more of them in the other room that we're gonna go into next. That woodland caribou in the middle there would have been, at the time that I killed it, I think number 2 or 3 in Pope and Young. I never had it officially scored, you know, so you can't make any of those kind of claims, but that would have been one of the top Pope and Young woodland caribou that had ever been killed. And now, there've been a lot of them killed since that he's dropped down the list. But that 8-pointer, he was a deer that, probably the biggest bodied buck that I've ever killed. He was another Southern Iowa deer. This was a little tight rack buck that I killed. That would have also been on one of the Midwest Whitetail episodes. Just a cool older deer that, you know, I had a lot of history with. You know, it wouldn't have meant anything to anybody but me, you know, but I remember the hunts for that deer and you know, the excitement that we had, you know, in the blind on the day that I finally got him. So, all right, let's go inside. This is where the bigger deer are. And, you know, we can talk about each one of these, but there's quite a bit to see in here too. Okay, now, this is the reason that I built that building. This is my office. This is where I come out to every day, even if I don't have any work to do. But we'll start looking at some of these deer. So that's another mule deer from eastern Colorado, 2 more. And you know, I'm not gonna dive into all my mule deer stories, but that was, like I said, one of my favorite hunts, you know, back in the time when I was doing that. The next one over This was one that I killed in 2019. The last buck that I killed on the farm that we sold down there in southern Iowa. He was a deer that, we called him the surprise buck. I knew that the deer had been on the farm in 2018. We had video of him, and he looked really good in 18, but maybe just a little bit too young. So when he showed up in 19, I didn't have any trail camera pictures of him. Didn't even know for sure if he was still alive or on the farm or anything. So he was a big surprise, and he'd made a big jump too. I mean, he's got a big, huge frame. You can't really appreciate some of these, unless you get them in your hands and just start turning them and holding them. But, as far as, the frames, he would rival just about anything else that I've got on the wall in here. The next buck over was one that we nicknamed him Bubba. And he was 8.5 years old when he died from EHD. So this is the recovered rack from a buck on the farm that died from EHD. And I think that I had a really good fighting chance of killing him that year. That would have been 2012 when he died. That was when EHD hit our farm down there the hardest. But Bubba had been a really wide roaming buck. He covered tons of country. He was not a homebody at all. And we had a tough time keeping track of this buck. But then as he got older, he started to more consolidate or focus down his range. And by 2012, I was getting a lot of daylight pictures of him in September, and he wasn't covering a lot of ground anymore. So I felt like, okay, finally this buck has become killable. Well, EHD got him in September, and he never made it into the hunting season, so I never had a chance to go after him. But I felt like finally, after all these years of knowing about this deer and finding sheds off him and stuff, that he's finally killable, and then the disease got him. This was one that I had nicknamed the G5 buck, and if you were a viewer of Midwest Whitetail, you remember that deer. He was younger than what I thought. And I'm not saying that you have to let the deer get a certain age. Obviously it's nice if they can get to maturity so you can find out what they really are. But he was, I think, only 4 years old. I thought he was 5, and I sent the teeth in for the aging, and they came back as a 4-year-old. So kind of, I won't say bittersweet, because it's hard to say I wouldn't have shot that deer, but I thought he was 5 at the time. But he came in and ran off the deer that's 2 deer down. He was coming to the tree, following a doe, that buck right there, 40 yards away, working his way toward me, and this deer came in and ran him off, right there, not too far at all from where the stand was. So at one time on that farm, he was a 190-inch deer, and that was over a 200-inch deer. I had a 190-inch and a 200-inch deer within, bow range of my tree one morning, one afternoon. It was an afternoon hunt. So that was the story on that deer. Was the greatest memory of that deer was how incredible that afternoon hunt was, to have deer of that size, 2 of them, within bow range in one evening. And that was 2011. So like I said, 11 was, it was a freak show on that farm. It really was. Another big mule deer. This was from the Eastern Plains. I think that was in 1990, was it 1995? And I kind of lucked into that deer. I've always said that, that was like, let's say that you took a new job and they paid you up front for 10 years worth of work. That's what that deer was, because I had just started mule deer hunting out in the plains, and I think it was the 2nd year of hunting out there. I killed this buck, and he was one of the biggest killed with a bow in North America that year. Might have been the biggest killed with a bow in Colorado that year, but just a giant deer. So this is that buck that I hit in 2011. When that one came in, the other one I talked about, ran him off, killed him in November, and I came back again in December with another tag, and this guy had really stepped up. I think the other buck was so aggressive that he had been kind of submissive in that area, and once I got this one killed, this one became very daylight active, just took over the whole area. And it's amazing to think that every time we went back in there on that ridge, we had a 50-50 chance of seeing a buck over 200 inches. And I can't imagine ever having that experience again, because he was so daylight active and so focused on living in that one small area that he was just out there all the time. Sometimes he was the first deer that came out in the evenings. And I had so many close encounters with that deer, and the adrenaline rushes and just the way he tore me up. I finally got a shot at him, 30 yards. He ducked, and one of many over the years that have humbled me, that when you shoot, they hear the sound of the shot, and then they drop down to load their legs up to run off. And in the process of that, the arrow hits him high. Well, the arrow hit him way up in the hump. So he got away in 2011. Those are the sheds off him, by the way. You'd think, oh, how come you've got his rack? Well, I've got his rack because we really made an effort to find the sheds. So then the next year, this is him. So I've got him up here twice, which is pretty cool. The one year when I should have killed him, and then the next year when I actually did kill him. So in 2012, he was one of the EHD survivors on the farm. I said that we got devastated, and he was one of the ones that made it through the net. He was living in the same area, super, super visible. Gosh, I had hundreds and hundreds of trail camera pictures of him in daylight. You could go in there almost any time, and one way or the other. He's gonna be someplace in that 30 or 40 acres. You could find him in daylight. And the trick, of course, was not to screw it up. He was in the middle of the farm, so it wasn't like he was ranging onto the neighbors. If I didn't kill that deer, it was only gonna be because I screwed it up, not because I did anything right. I should kill him. It's more like, you just got to keep from doing something wrong. So I hunted really careful. I had pictures of him going through like this little crossing between two fields down in this valley every single day for like a week at an hour before the end of legal shooting time. I didn't hunt him down there because of the swirling wind. It seems like you'd think, oh, I'd go in there and get him, but it wasn't worth the risk because he wasn't going anywhere. His range was small. And he was just very active in that range. So he was maybe the easiest buck I've ever hunted, but for sure the easiest big buck that I've ever hunted because how active he was in that little small range where he lived. So the story on that deer, of course, is just how much history I had with him and what a hole that deer left in the farm when he was dead. Because we'd spent so much time hunting him. And then when you kill him, then there's that sense of loss. Everybody thinks that you're so excited when you kill a big deer, but sometimes you're not. Sometimes you just feel sad. All right, so next one. This one is also kind of a cool story buck. This is a deer that I killed in eastern Colorado when I was out there mule deer hunting. It was a mule deer hunt, but then we pulled into this creek way out in the plains, and this buck crossed in front of the headlights. I can't remember what we were doing in there, I think we were leaving. So immediately the whole hunt flipped. And I thought he was probably, because he was facing the truck. I thought he was the 160s, maybe something like that. But I didn't get the full sense of how big he was because you couldn't see all the tines and you couldn't see the length of the main beam. He was coming out feeding, and Dan saw him coming out, and he wasn't coming past the little tree stand that I'd put up. And it was just in a gnarled up old, I don't know what it was, kind of tree it was, some kind of, I don't know, I can't remember even, but it was only like 12 feet off the ground, and there was no way I could shoot behind me. It was too thick. It wasn't a really good setup, but it was right on the creek. Well, he fed out, about 150 yards away, and Dan saw that, and he swung out and just walked across the field, another 150, 200 yards from the deer. Well, that started the herd moving my way. There was probably 2 or 3 bucks and maybe 4 or 5 does, and they started coming toward me. Well, they weren't walking, they were running, and he was coming straight at my tree. Dead straight on a beeline. And earlier in the hunt, I'd set a hat on a branch, and the wind had kicked up and knocked that hat off, and it was laying on the ground. Well, he's trotting along, and there was going to be no shot, because there's no way I was going to, But he saw that hat, and he put the brakes on, and it was like watching Barry Sanders, trying to miss a tackler, and he pivoted and took off, right into my shooting lane. And I was at full draw, trying to figure out, what's going to happen here. Well, then he put the brakes on and turned. Well, I was able to get right there and get the shot. So that was a cool, like I said, cool story. So this would have been 2011. Again, I said 2011 was awesome on the farm. 2012 was the year our daughter killed the one below. But 11, our son killed that buck, and he was, like a 170s class deer. And then I killed the one above him, which was, pushing 180 inches with all the sticker points and stuff. Well, there's a 170, a 180. I killed a 190 and lost a 200-inch deer, all in one season on one farm. Unbelievable. So anyway, there's a lot of good memories, of hunting with the kids, of course. Everybody talks about, which ones are your favorite deer, and some of my favorites are the ones that, you spend with the kids. So that was one that I really enjoyed hunting with Drew. I was filming his hunt, and that was on Midwest Whitetail. So that would have been December 4th, 2011. So you can find that hunt. Our daughter killed that one in 2012, and it was during the youth season, so it was, what does it say on there? September 22nd. Another really cool one that I know I have great memories for. The one on top was a deer that we'd nicknamed Daggers, and he was another one that I misjudged. He was gone off the farm for a whole year. We'd seen him so it was 11, so we saw him in 2009, in November of 2009, and we didn't see him at all in 2010. Then he showed back up in 2011, and I somehow had it in my head that he was a year older than he actually was. And again, I don't know in the grand scheme of things if I'd have let him go, if I'd have known, but I thought he was 5 and he was 4. 180-inch 4-year-old with all those sticker points. There's no telling what that deer could have grown into, but he didn't get a chance. So this one was a deer that we had nicknamed Skinny. I think the cool story about Skinny was the fact that we knew enough about the deer from the trail camera photos that I had a pretty good idea what conservative places that I could hunt this deer. Like if I put enough time in, and didn't push too deep into the middle of his core, that I had a pretty decent chance of eventually getting him. And that's kind of how he fell into my lap, was hunting the fringes, not getting too aggressive. So that was maybe the lesson and the story on Skinny. It took a while. He was another. I caught a lot of flack for that one too, because I had this history of these string jumpers, so I just decided I'm going to aim low on everything from now on. If they're showing even the least amount of alertness, I'm aiming for the brisket line and letting them fall into the arrow. Well, he comes out, and I grunted and stopped him and aimed right for the brisket line. Well, he didn't budge, of course, and the arrow just skims right across his brisket and shaves a couple hairs off, and he runs out another 20 yards, or not even that far, 15 yards, and stops and looks back. And he was so rutted up following a doe that he did not put us in the tree with danger. I don't know what he was thinking, but he just stood there staring at us. And I told the cameraman, it was Zach Fehrenbaugh at the time, I said, well, I'm going to try to get an arrow. So he's 45 yards away staring at us, and I'm getting an arrow out of the quiver, putting it on the bow, and drawing back. And he kept standing there, so I shot at him again, and finally did get him. So he gave me 2 shots. Next one was a deer that we had nicknamed Lefty, and he was 5 years old, and when he was 4 years old, believe it or not, he was bigger. Super massive, really fun deer to hunt. He became more predictable too, but I think he was covering quite a bit of ground, but he was doing a lot of daylight moving. And people say, well, daylight, versus nocturnal, that's a learned. He wasn't super hard to kill, but super fun buck to hunt. Next one was a deer. This was, I killed him in 1995. It was my first buck hunting in southern Iowa. After moving to southern Iowa from northern Iowa back in 95. And it was just a little narrow funnel, a long finger of timber that ran out into a big field of CRP, and it kind of narrowed down right in that spot, and that's where I killed him. That was a November 7th buck, my favorite day of the season. So that got me into it. He was my first big deer that I ever killed. These next 2 are the ones I killed in the past 2 seasons. And the one on the right is the buck that I killed in 2000. This was the first deer I'd killed in 13 years, 14 years without a cameraman. So it was more about just the freedom of, being able to kick back and not have to tell a story every time I went out to the tree. So this buck was living on a ridge. He probably covered a little bit of ground, but I had him kind of narrowed down to one ridge. So that was the story on him. He was, killed him on the 29th of October and early in the afternoon. Surprised the heck out of me, but hey, I'll take the gift horse, right? That was really cool. So then this past season was the deer furthest to the left. That deer was on the same property. It was really hard at the end of legal shooting time to get out of any tree stand and work your way back down through that valley where all the deer are at, focus on the food to get back to your vehicle. Same thing in the morning, you try to get in there, and work your way up into any spots where you wanted to hunt up on those ridges. So I finally came to the conclusion that the only way I was going to do any good on that property was to sleep out there. As crazy as it sounded, it actually worked pretty well. So I'd hunt on the ridges, and I would just climb down and sleep, as close as I could to the base of the tree. And anytime I hunted in the valley, up in there, near that ridge where I thought this buck was living, and I slept in a blind. So I never left or came to or from any of those locations when I was bumping into deer. I had 20 days of hunting basically one ridge until I finally killed him. And they were still moving pretty much naturally. So that's how I ended up killing him. And my whole hunting philosophy over the years has evolved toward that extreme focus on entry and exit. If you can't hunt it without bumping them, then either you can't hunt it, or in the case like I did last season, you just can't leave that spot. You got to stay until the conditions are better for you to come and go.